The rain came down hard over the courtyard, soaking through a pile of clothes, photographs, and one folder nobody was supposed to see. Nora dropped to her knees and pulled it free before the water could finish it off. Madame Han stood dry under the awning, arms crossed, watching a woman she had known for 9 weeks kneel in the mud like it was nothing at all to her. You should have kept your things more organized.
This is what happens
when people overstay a temporary
position.
Nora rose slowly, the folder
You're
pressed
right.
to her chest, rain running
I have
down her
overstayed
collar.
something.
You're right, she said quietly. I have overstayed something. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't cry. She looked for one unsettling second like a woman doing math in her head and arriving at an answer she'd already known was coming. She walked past Madame Han into the rain instead of out of it, already dialing a number she'd promised herself she wouldn't use unless she had no other choice. Move forward, she said. All of it. 4 words. Nobody standing in that courtyard understood yet what they were about to cost. Because here is the question worth asking before we go any further. If Nora really owned the ground Madame Han was standing on, why was she the one being thrown out of it? Why does a woman with that kind of power let herself be humiliated for 9 weeks first? For that, we have to go back. 3 weeks before the rain. The Han residence ran on rules nobody wrote down, but everyone obeyed. Staff did not speak first. Staff did not sit in the family's chairs. Staff did not, under any circumstance, correct a guest, no matter how wrong the guest happened to be. Nora learned the rules in 4 days. She learned everything else in 4 days, too. The household's finances, its blind spots, the names of every vendor who walked through the side gate, though nobody in the house knew it yet. It was a Tuesday when the scheduling collided. A business dinner and a family anniversary dinner, both booked for the same evening, both requiring the same dining room. The housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Pak, was near tears trying to fix it before Madame Han noticed. Nora looked at the 2 calendars for 11 seconds. Move the anniversary dinner to the garden terrace, candles instead of the chandelier. Madame Han will think it was her idea to make it more intimate. Mrs. Pak stared at her. How do you... I don't. I'm guessing. I'm usually right. She was right. An old man in a chauffeur's jacket watched the exchange from the doorway without saying anything. Mr. Back had driven for the Han family for over 20 years, long enough to have opinions he kept entirely to himself. He looked at Nora a beat longer than the moment required, then went back to polishing the car keys in his hand. She noticed him noticing. She filed it away and said nothing. This is what she did with everything. Filed it, said nothing, waited. That evening, a guest at the business dinner spoke to her in rapid, dismissive English, assuming she wouldn't understand a word of it, complaining loudly about the help while she refilled his glass. She understood every word. She said nothing. She refilled the glass without spilling a drop. Tae Min, seated 2 chairs down, caught the moment. His eyes flicked to her face, then to the guest, then back. Something in him made a small note and filed it away, too. Later, in the kitchen corridor, he found her stacking trays. You didn't have to let him talk to you like that. Yes, I did. That's the job. That's not the only thing you're capable of, though, is it? She looked at him for a beat too long before answering. I don't know what you mean, sir. He almost smiled. Tae Min, not sir. She let that sit without agreeing to it. You're new, he said. Mrs. Pak says you speak 3 languages, and somehow nobody bothered to ask you in the interview. Nobody asked, I didn't offer. Why not? She considered the honest answer and gave him a different one. People treat you differently once they know what you're capable of. Sometimes it's easier to let them underestimate you. He studied her a moment longer than the sentence required, like it told him more than she meant it to. What none of them knew, not Mrs. Pak, not the guest, not even Tae-min, was that Nora hadn't wandered into this house looking for work. She had chosen it. She had studied the family for months before she ever put in an application under a name that wasn't the one carved in her father's grave. She knew their staffing gaps before Mrs. Pak posted them. She knew their schedules, their weaknesses, their blind spots before she ever walked through the gate. She wasn't hiding from this family. She was inside it, on purpose, watching. It was Madame Han who noticed her first, really noticed her, on the 9th day. A delivery arrived at the side entrance. Crates for the wine cellar. Routine, except for the shipping label facing up on the top box. Yoon Logistics, Cargo Division. Madame Han was crossing the hall when she saw it. She stopped walking. For exactly 1 second, her composure slipped somewhere it hadn't slipped in years, an old, private weight passing behind her eyes and gone before anyone could name it. "Who authorized this vendor?" she said, too sharp for the size of the question. "It's a shipping company, Madame Han," Mrs. Pak said carefully. "Not the vendor, just the carrier." "Change it." Madame Han's voice was flat now, composed again. She walked away without explaining why. Nora, standing near the stairs with a tray in her hands, watched her go. Mr. Bake, passing behind her with a stack of folded linens, slowed just slightly. "Yoon," he murmured, almost to himself. "Haven't heard that name in this house in a long time." Nora turned. "Did you say something, Mr. Bake?" He looked at her for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. "No," he said, finally. "Nothing. Old man talking to himself." He walked on before she could ask anything else. She filed it the way she filed everything, quietly, without reacting. But this one she underlined. 2 days later, Madame Han found a reason to reassign her. "You'll serve the gardened luncheon tomorrow," she said, not looking up from her tablet, standing the whole time. "Guests only, no sitting, no breaks, no exceptions." "Yes, Madame Han." "And Nora," Madame Han finally looked at her, something appraising and cold in it. "I don't know where you came from before this house, and I don't need to, but people who don't belong in a room like mine tend to remind me of that fact eventually. I'd prefer you not be one of them." Nora kept her expression perfectly still. "I understand, Madame Han." She understood far more than Madame Han meant her to, and she was, quietly, already several steps past this conversation, wondering not whether Madame Han would remember the name Yoon, wondering how long it would take. Her pay was short that month, not by a little. Mrs. Pak showed her the ledger, apologetic, unable to explain it. "It says you broke a set of imported glassware, 6 pieces. "I didn't break anything." "I know," Mrs. Pak lowered her voice, "but it's already been deducted." Nora didn't argue. Arguing would mean being seen, and being seen was the one thing she couldn't afford yet. She said nothing to Madame Han. She said nothing to anyone. But 3 days later, the full amount appeared back in her account, no explanation attached. When she checked, quietly, she found it had come from Tae-min's personal transfer, not the house account. She didn't thank him. She wasn't supposed to know it was him. But she started watching him differently after that, not as an obstacle to work around, a variable she hadn't planned for. A guest's bracelet went missing during a dinner party, expensive, sentimental, loudly mourned. Madame Han's eyes went to Nora before anyone had said a single accusing word. "Search the staff quarters," she said. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. The bracelet turned up later behind a cushion, exactly where the guest had left it. But the damage had already happened, in front of a room of people who mattered to the Han family's reputation. Nora stood through the search with her hands folded, giving nothing away, saying nothing in her own defense. Tae-min said something instead. She's been in this house 9 weeks and never given anyone a reason to doubt her, he told his mother. Quiet, but not soft. Maybe look for a better one before you humiliate someone in my own home. Madame Han's jaw didn't move, but something in her eyes did. Careful, she said. You're starting to sound like you care what happens to the help. He didn't answer that. He didn't have to. They both already knew. Afterward, in the corridor, Nora found him waiting. You didn't need to do that, she said. I keep saying that. Maybe I need people to hear it more than you need me to say it. She almost smiled. Almost. You're going to get yourself in trouble, Taemin. I'm already in trouble. I just haven't figured out what kind yet. Neither had she. Not out loud. Not the kind that mattered. Late that night, long after the house had gone quiet, Nora passed Madame Han's study and saw a thin line of lamplight under the door. She should have kept walking. She didn't. Through the gap where the door didn't sit flush, she saw Madame Han kneeling at a low cabinet, a key already in the lock, a drawer nobody in the house was permitted to open. Inside, folders, old ones, the edges soft with handling. Madame Han lifted one out. A photograph slid loose and landed face up on the floor. 2 men shaking hands outside a construction site, decades younger. One of them, Madame Han's late husband. She stared at it for a long moment. Her hand, when it reached down to pick it back up, was not steady. You should have taken the money and disappeared, she said. To no one. To a photograph. To a man who wasn't in the room. Why didn't you just disappear? Beneath it, a second folder, thinner, marked only with a company name in faded ink, Daihan Holdings. She didn't open that one. She never did. She locked the drawer instead, like the folder was something she'd rather not look directly at, and turned off the lamp. Nora was gone before the door opened, her heart going fast in a way her face never let show. She hadn't seen the second man's face clearly, but she recognized the shape of his shoulders. She recognized the watch on his wrist. It had been her father's. And now she had a name to match to a company she'd spent 3 years trying to trace, Daihan Holdings. Not evidence yet, but close enough to feel like the ground shifting under her for once instead of everyone else. The ticking clock arrived 2 mornings later, delivered the way most disasters are, casually, over breakfast, like it was nothing. The building's going to market, Madame Han told Taemin, sliding a folder across the table. I want it finalized within the month. I need you to handle the transaction personally. I don't trust the lawyers on this one to move quickly enough. Sell it, Taemin frowned. We've owned this property for 20 years.
Which is exactly why it's time. Madame Han's tone allowed no follow-up questions. It's not sentimental, Taemin. It's an asset. Liquidate it. 3 days into the paperwork, something small snagged him. The title search came back from the registry with an unusual flag, a chain of custody note requiring manual verification before the transfer could be cleared. The kind of thing that usually meant nothing, an old filing error before digital records. He called the registry office directly. Is there a problem with the building's title history? Nothing wrong, sir, said the clerk. Just an active holding entity still listed as a secondary interest holder on the historical chain. Happens with older properties. It shouldn't hold up your sale. It's mostly a formality checkbox at this point. Which entity? A pause. Papers shuffling on the other end. Daihan Holdings. He wrote the name down out of habit, the way he wrote down anything that crossed his desk twice, and thought nothing more of it. He didn't know he had just been handed the one task in the world that could destroy the woman he was falling for. Nora, clearing plates 2 feet away, kept her hands perfectly steady. Inside, something had gone very still and very cold. She had spent 3 years assembling a case 1 document at a time, waiting for the right moment to use it, Waiting because using it too early meant losing whatever leverage silence still gave her. She didn't have that luxury anymore. If the sale closed before she moved, the ground she was standing on, literally, legally, the actual ground under this house, would belong to a stranger by the end of the month, and whatever her father had built to protect his name would disappear along with it. She had 30 days. She'd need considerably less than that. She called the only number her father had left her, in an envelope she wasn't supposed to open until she was certain she needed it. Director So answered on the second ring, like he'd been waiting 3 years for this exact call. "I wondered when you'd finally call. Your father thought it might take you longer to work up the nerve." "I don't have time for wondering, Director So. Tell me what he left me." There was a pause on the line, the kind that comes before something changes shape. "Your father didn't lose that development deal to the hands, Nora. He let them believe he lost it. 20 years ago, he watched what they did to another family who crossed them, quietly, thoroughly, no fingerprints anywhere. He decided he wasn't going to let it happen to his. So before the deal closed, he moved the building's holding company into a structure they never checked. He let them build their whole lives on top of property he still controlled. Insurance in case they ever came for what was his. Why didn't he use it? Why did he just stay quiet for 20 years? Because using it meant war, and your father didn't want war. He wanted you safe more than he wanted to be right." So's voice softened. He left the structure intact and hoped he'd never need it. He died still hoping that. Nora closed her eyes. "And now? Now it's yours, all of it. The company, the deed, the leverage he never used. The question isn't whether you own that building anymore, Nora. You already do. The question is what you're going to do about it. There's a sale in motion, a month, maybe less."
"Then you have a month to decide who you want to be about this," Seo said. "I can have the transfer records certified in 48 hours if you ask me to. I won't ask you why until you're ready to tell me." She looked out the narrow staff quarters window at the house she'd been serving dinner in for 9 weeks. She had never once, in 9 weeks, been trapped in this house. She had been studying it. And the family living inside it had spent 9 weeks unknowingly handing her every piece of access she needed. The schedules, the paperwork, the trust of the one son that mattered, the very sale documents that would have buried her father's claim if she hadn't been standing close enough to see them cross the table. "Certify it," she said, "but I'm not using it yet." "What are you waiting for?" "One more thing to become undeniable," she said quietly. "I'll know it when I see it." The order came down on a Thursday while Nora was still deciding how to move carefully. "Clear the staff quarters on the east wing," Madame Han told Mrs. Pak. "Today, I don't want to hear complaints." Nobody warned Nora in time. She came back from the market to find her belongings already outside, not packed, not folded, simply thrown into the courtyard where the afternoon rain had just begun to fall. Her clothes, her few photographs, and near the bottom of the soaking pile, a folder she had hidden at the back of her closet, the one with her father's name typed across the top in fading ink. She dropped to her knees in the rain and pulled it free before the water could finish what Madame Han had started, without even knowing it. Madame Han stood on the covered porch, dry, arms crossed. "You should have kept your things more organized. This is what happens when people overstay a temporary position." Mrs. Pak hovered near the doorway, clearly having tried to stop this and clearly having failed. Mr. Bake stood further back, silent, watching Nora kneel in the rain with an expression that looked almost like grief. Nora didn't look up right away. When she finally did, something in her face had changed. Not anger, not tears, something quieter and far more dangerous. "You're right," she said. "I have overstayed something. She stood, folder pressed against her chest, rain running down her collar. This was the moment from before, the one we already saw, only now you know what she was really holding. Tae-min arrived just in time to see it, his mother dry under the awning, Nora soaked through in the courtyard below, and something unspoken passing between the two women that he didn't yet have the context to understand. "Nora!" He started toward her. She held up a hand, not unkind, just final. "I'm all right. I just need to make a call." "Let me help you carry—" "Tae-min." Something in her voice stopped him where he stood. "Not right now." He watched her walk past both of them, into the rain instead of out of it, and understood without knowing why that whatever had just happened was bigger than a pile of wet clothes. She dialed Director Seo with hands that had finally, completely stopped being careful. "Move forward," she said. "All of it. Not revenge, not yet, and maybe not ever. Just the end of waiting." Inside the house, Tae-min stood at the hallway window, watching her disappear around the corner of the garden wall, phone still pressed to her ear. Mr. Beck came to stand beside him, quiet, both of them watching the same rain. "You know something," Tae-min said. It wasn't a question. The old man was silent for a long moment. "I know I drove a man named Yoon to this house 20 years ago," he said finally, "and I know your mother never let me drive him anywhere else after that. Beyond that, young master, it isn't my place." "Beck, ask your mother." Mr. Beck's voice was gentle but final. "Some things aren't mine to hand you. They're hers to finally say out loud." He walked away before Tae-min could press further, leaving him with a name and no shape to put around it yet. Only the certainty, cold and growing, that whatever was coming had been waiting in this house a great deal longer than 9 weeks. Which brought them back to the boardroom. Nora set the folder down and this time opened it. The first document was the original deed, her father's signature notarized at the bottom, dated decades before Madame Han had ever ordered her out of the rain. Madame Han glanced at it and scoffed, already recovering her composure. "This is meaningless. We hold the current registration, whatever paperwork you've forged." "It's not forged, it's the parent structure." Nora slid the second page across. "That holding company that's owned this building's registration for 20 years, Daehan Holdings. You'll recognize the name. You signed lease renewals to it every year without reading past the letterhead." Madame Han's hand, reaching for the page, stopped halfway. "That company was dissolved." "It was transferred," Nora said, "to my father's estate, and 3 weeks ago to me." "I don't believe you." Madame Han's voice was too loud for the room. She snatched her phone from the table and dialed her own attorney on speaker, her hand not quite steady on the screen. "Min-sok, pull the ownership history on the building registration. Now, tell this woman she's mistaken." There was a pause on the line, papers shuffling somewhere across the city. "Madame Han," the attorney's voice was careful, the way voices get when they're about to say something a client doesn't want to hear. "It's not a mistake. Daehan Holdings shows an estate transfer processed and certified 2.5 weeks ago. It's already recorded. I was going to call you about it this week." Madame Han lowered the phone slowly, like it had gotten heavier in her hand. "Director Seo certified it the day I filed," Nora said, quiet now. No need to raise her voice at all. The color left Madame Han's face slowly, not all at once, the way understanding arrives when a person has spent 20 years making sure they'd never have to feel it. "Yoon," she said, the syllable landing like something she'd been avoiding out loud for 2 decades. "You're his daughter." "I am." Tae-min looked between the two women, the last piece finally settling into place. The shipping label,
The drawer, the locked composure, the deduction he'd quietly repaid without ever knowing why it had felt necessary. The company name he'd skimmed past in a folder his mother handed him 3 weeks ago. "Mother," his voice was low, "what did you do to her father?" Madame Han didn't answer him. She was still staring at Nora. "I protected this family," she said, quieter now, less certain of it than she sounded. "Your father made a deal, and I made sure our name survived what came after it. That's all I ever did."
You made sure your name survived by letting everyone believe mine had failed. I didn't know you'd come back into this house. You didn't know, Nora said, because you never once asked who you were throwing into the rain. That's not an accident, Madame Han. That's a habit. Silence sat in the room for a moment neither of them tried to fill. Then Madame Han, for the first time in the entire story, sat down. Tae-min crossed the room and stood beside Nora instead of beside his mother's chair. He didn't say anything dramatic. He didn't need to. The staging said it for him. 3 weeks later, the Han residence looked exactly the same from the outside. Inside, the lease sat signed on the same boardroom table. Fair terms, market rate, nothing punitive written into a single clause. Nora hadn't taken the house from them. She'd simply made sure they knew, finally, whose hands it had always rested in. Madame Han found her in the garden the morning the papers were finalized. It wasn't a warm conversation. It wasn't meant to be. "I was wrong about who you were," Madame Han said, stiffly, like the words cost her something to produce. "And I was wrong about what that meant I was allowed to do to you." Nora nodded once. She didn't offer forgiveness. She didn't withhold it either. "That's enough for now," she said. Madame Han lingered like there was more she wanted to say and no shape ready to hold it. "Your father was a better man than I let myself remember," she added finally. "I think I knew that 20 years ago, too." "I know," Nora said. "He knew it about himself. That's why he never used any of this while you were still calling the shots." Madame Han had no answer for that. She turned and walked back toward the house alone, and for the first time since Nora had arrived in it, the house didn't feel like it belonged to her. It was Tae-min who found her afterward by the same gate where she'd once refilled a stranger's glass without spilling a drop. "So," he said, "landlord, don't get used to the discount on rent." He smiled, and for once so did she, fully, without calculating who was watching. She hadn't spent 9 weeks becoming powerful. She had walked through that gate powerful already, and simply waited for the room to catch up. If you found out tomorrow that the person you looked down on had been holding the power to change your entire life the whole time, would you even recognize the moment it changed? Subscribe for more stories where the quiet ones are never the ones without power.